The wind on Vari's fur did not blow. It pushed. It shoved against a man like it had a grudge, like it remembered something personal. Rory Callum had been working this planet for 2 years, and he still had not made peace with the wind. He was 3 kilometers out from the outpost when the blizzard finally broke. 3 days it had kept him inside, pressing his face against the frost-fogged window and watching white nothing move across white nothing. The moment the sky cracked open and showed something pale and gray that passed for daylight on this world, he had pulled on his survey gear and gone out. Not because anyone told him to. His contract gave him flexibility on timing. He went because sitting still made him restless, and restless men made bad decisions in isolated postings. He had learned that early. His job was geology. The mining company that paid his salary wanted detailed scans of the ridge shelf 2 kilometers north, specifically the mineral deposits sitting under 40 meters of compressed rock. He walked with his scanner in hand, his boots crunching through the fresh top layer of snow that the storm had laid down over everything like a clean white sheet pulled tight across a bed. The mountains of Vari's fur were old, older than most things with names. They had been folded and cracked and folded again by geological forces that made the planet's interior sound like a slow argument that never resolved. Rory liked them. They had a kind of patience that he respected. He was halfway to the ridge when he saw the shape. It was easy to miss. Just a lump in the snow, a slight color difference. The white of the drifts was bright and hard, and this was softer, darker, a blue-gray that sat wrong against everything around it. He almost walked past it. His scanner was already pointing at the ridge. His notes were already forming in his head. He stopped anyway. He did not know why exactly. Some instinct that had nothing to do with geology. He walked toward the shape and crouched down 2 meters away, and that was when he saw the scale. It was small, no bigger than a dog, one of the medium-sized breeds, maybe knee-height if it were standing. But it was not standing. It was curled in on itself, pressed into the snow, wings folded tight and trembling, and those wings were covered in scales the color of a sky just before a storm. Blue-gray, the same color that had caught his eye. A dragon. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. A Varisci juvenile, which was the proper scientific term, though everyone on Vari's fur called them dragons because that was exactly what they looked like and no amount of academic terminology changed that basic fact. Rory had seen adult Varisci twice. Once at a distance, crossing the ridge in a group, their silhouettes enormous against the evening sky. Once up close, at the colony's formal greeting ceremony when he had first arrived, a clan representative, standing taller than 2 men stacked, radiating the kind of physical authority that made a person stand very straight and speak very carefully. He had never seen a young one. Nobody had told him they were this small. He crouched there in the snow and looked at it, and thought about what he knew. Varisci were sapient, fully sapient, with language and law and a clan structure that had been evolving for longer than humans had been writing things down. They were also famously careful about their territory and famously cold toward the off-world settlers who had arrived on Vari's 430 years ago under a resource-sharing treaty that the Varisci had accepted without warmth and monitored without trust. The smart thing to do was call it in. Contact the outpost. Let them contact the colonial office. Let the colonial office contact the Varisci clan liaison, and wait for someone who had actual diplomatic training to handle this. He looked at the hatchling. It was shivering, not the fine tremble of cold that passes quickly. The deep, bone-level shaking of something that had been cold for a very long time and was running out of the ability to keep fighting it. One of its wings was pinned under a chunk of rock, a slab that had come down off the ridge shelf, probably during the storm. The wing was not torn. He could not see blood, but the angle was wrong and the creature could not move it. It was trapped, had been trapped, he realized, for at least 3 days. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he put his scanner away, pulled off his outer glove, and started moving the rock. It was heavier than it looked. Most things on Vari's fur were. The mineral density of the planet made everything weigh more than it should, which was part of why the mining company was so interested. He got his shoulder under the edge of the slab and pushed, and it shifted, grinding against the ice, and the pinned wing came free. The hatchling did not react. It was too far gone for that. It registered the change. Its head lifted slightly, one eye cracked open, pale gold under a heavy lid, and then dropped again. Rory pulled his outer coat open. He was warm underneath. He had good gear, The company was at least reliable about gear. He thought about what happened to hypothermic creatures, and he thought about the 3-kilometer walk back, and he thought about the colonial office's response time, which was measured in days. He picked the hatchling up. It was heavier than he expected, dense like the rock. The scales were cold against his hands, and the trembling ran through them both. He tucked it against his chest, inside his coat as far as it would go, and held it there with one arm, and began walking back toward the outpost. It made one sound, very low, not a cry, something else, something with no alarm in it, which surprised him. And then it went still. Not the stillness of something dead, the stillness of something that had decided, on whatever terms made sense to it, that it was safe. Its weight settled against him, heavy and warm-seeking, and by the time he had walked 500 meters, he could feel its breathing had slowed and deepened. It was asleep. Rory walked through the broken snow with an armful of dragon and thought, carefully and with great precision, about how completely unprepared he was for whatever came next. The outpost lights were still on when he reached the door. He stood there for a moment, hand on the latch, and looked down at the small scaled face tucked against his chest. Then he opened the door and went inside. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes after a decision has been made and before the consequences have shown up. Rory Callum knew that quiet well. He had lived in it before. The moment after signing a 3-year contract for a remote posting. The moment after telling his brother he was leaving for a different system. The moment after choosing, without much deliberation, to pick up a half-frozen dragon from a snowdrift. The outpost was warm. That was the main thing. The thermal exchange system ran off the geothermal tap beneath the foundation, and it kept the 2 main rooms at a steady, comfortable temperature regardless of what the mountain wind was doing outside. Rory set the hatchling down near the floor vent carefully, the way he would have set down something made of glass. It did not wake up. He stepped back and looked at it. In the flat interior light, it looked different from the snow. Smaller, somehow, and also more real. The scales caught the light in a way that shifted, blue-gray at a distance, but up close there were faint traces of silver in them, thin lines that ran along the ridges. Its claws were pale. Its face, folded against its own tail, had the compressed density of a creature built to withstand pressure. Even half dead of cold, it looked like it had been engineered to survive. He went to his workstation and opened his colony network terminal. The search took a while because the Veriskei biological database was mostly locked behind diplomatic clearance levels he did not have. What he could access was the general entry, the kind of overview written for new settlers who needed to know enough to avoid starting an incident. He read it 3 times. Veriskei juveniles, defined as any Veriskei under their 8th cycle, were clan-dependent. They did not travel alone, ever. The clan structure treated the young as a collective responsibility, and a juvenile without adult escort was classified in Veriskei law as a crisis situation, the kind of event that mobilized resources. They had a word for it that translated roughly as sundered flame, which suggested how seriously they took it. He read the line about bond sleep and did not fully understand it, so he moved on. He found a brief medical note. Juveniles in hypothermic distress required warmth above all else. No forced feeding, no bright lights, no sudden loud sounds. If the juvenile was unconscious, do not attempt to wake it. Let the body regulate. He turned the overhead light down to half. Then he went and sat on the floor on the opposite side of the room and waited. He was not a man who carried a great deal of anxiety with him. Some people, when they were alone and uncertain, filled the space with noise, music, talking to themselves, endless activity. Rory had learned to sit. His grandmother had told him once that a man who could not be still was a man who could not think, and he had decided she was right. He sat. He watched the hatchling breathe. He made notes in his survey log, not about the geology, just a plain factual record of the day's events in case it ever became necessary to show someone what had happened and in what order. Several hours passed. The hatchling moved. Not all at once. First a shift of the tail. Then the wings pulled in tighter, not from cold, Rory thought, but the instinctive guarding movement of something waking in an unfamiliar place. The breathing changed. Then the eyes opened. They were gold, a deep, clear gold that caught the low light and held it. They moved fast, scanning the ceiling, the walls, the floor, and then they found him. What happened next was fast and loud and very small. The hatchling came upright like a spring releasing. Both wings snapped open, undersized for its body still, growing wings that were not yet the full span they would become, but they looked large in the enclosed room. It opened its mouth and produced a sound that was less a roar than a sustained high hiss, the kind of sound that communicated pure threat in any language, and it held that position with everything it had, which was considerable. Rory did not move. He had thought about this during the hours of waiting. He had thought about what he knew about fear, his own, and other things. He knew that a frightened creature deciding whether to fight or flee would take its cue from the thing in front of it. Move fast, and it would decide you were a threat. Make yourself smaller, and it might have a chance to think. He was already on the floor. He put his hands flat on the ground, open, palms visible. He looked at the wall beside the hatchling rather than directly at it. He did not speak. The hissing continued for a while. Then it dropped in pitch. Then it stopped. The hatchling did not lower its wings. But it looked at him properly, not the scanning panic look of a moment ago, but something slower, something that was trying to process information. Rory counted in his head. He got to 1200 before he moved at all, and the movement was very simple. He reached sideways to where he had placed a wide bowl of water, and he nudged it across the floor. Not toward the hatchling, perpendicular, setting it down in the space between them, and then pulling his hand back. He looked at the wall again. He heard the sound of something approaching across the floor, slow, cautious, claws clicking on the composite surface. A pause. The sound of drinking, which in a creature of that size sounded like a small, efficient machine. Then silence. Then, very quietly, the sound of a much larger weight settling against the floor. He looked. The hatchling had curled up again, not near the vent this time. It had moved and chosen, with what seemed like deliberate intention, the exact spot where his boots were sitting beside the door. It was pressed against them, wings folded, eyes half closed. The gold eyes found him once more before they closed fully. He had no idea what to make of that look. It was not warm. It was not frightened, not anymore. It was the look of something that had filed him away under a category that did not have a name yet, and was willing, for now, to leave him there. He exhaled slowly. Then his comm unit lit up on the wall, and the sound it made was the colony alert frequency, the one used for formal off-world contact. He crossed the room and read the message. It was short. 3 Variskai clan vessels had entered Vari's 4 orbital space 40 minutes ago. They had filed a search and recovery notice with the Colonial Port Authority. The notice listed, in formal Variskai legal language, a description of a missing juvenile. The description matched the creature asleep on his boots exactly. Rory stood there for a moment with the comm unit in his hand. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at the message. He put the comm unit down, went to his bunk, and sat on the edge of it and thought. There was nothing panicked in his thinking. It was simply the kind of thinking that happens when a man understands, clearly and without drama, that the situation has just changed and the window for easy options has closed. 3 ships. Search and recovery. Variskai clan law, which he had read enough about to know it, did not move gently. And a hatchling asleep on his boots, who had chosen that spot on its own. He got up, checked the thermal settings on the vent, and went to put a kettle on. Not because he needed the tea, because it gave his hands something to do while he figured out what kind of man he was going to have to be tomorrow. Snow does not muffle everything. People think it does, that soft white covering, that hush that comes after a fresh fall. But Rory had lived on Varis for long enough to know better. Snow on this planet was dense. It carried vibration rather than absorbing it, transmitted the pressure of heavy footsteps the way water carries sound, low and directional, and very clear. He felt them before he heard them. He was eating from a ration pack at his workstation, watching the dawn come up gray and slow through the small north-facing window, when the floor told him something was happening outside. A low rhythmic pressure that was not geological. He put the ration pack down and went to the window. They came from the tree line to the north, moving in a widespread formation that covered the open ground in front of the outpost methodically. He counted as they came, 10, 15, 20, more emerging from between the dark trunks. Adult Variskai, in full clan travel gear, which meant layered hide and plate armor in dark colors, and weapons that were not drawn but were not hidden either. He had always known, academically, that Variskai were large. standing near the single clan representative at the colony welcome ceremony 2 years ago, had impressed that on him. But one was different from 30. 30 changed the geometry of the land outside his window, made the outpost feel like a very small thing sitting in a very large space, surrounded by people who could dismantle it without particular effort. He looked over at the hatchling, still near his boots, awake now and watching the window with those gold eyes tracking across the glass. He pulled on his outer layers. He checked nothing. He had no weapon, and there would have been no point in one regardless. He went to the door, opened it, and walked out into the cold. The Variskai stopped moving when he appeared. He stopped too. For a moment, the only sound was the wind coming off the ridge and the quiet settling of 30 large armored beings who had frozen mid-step in a way that was surprisingly disciplined. One of them walked forward, bigger than the rest, which was a statement that required a moment to appreciate. With armor that carried more marking on it, clan symbols worked into the plating that Rory could not read but could recognize as carrying weight. The face was angular and scaled in darker tones than the hatchling, and the gold of the eyes was not warm like the hatchling's. It was flat and measuring. It stopped at 4 meters, not close enough to reach him, close enough to make the distance feel like a formal choice rather than comfort. It spoke. The voice was deep and layered in the Variskai way, like two sounds occupying the same register, and the language was Variskai, which he did not speak. Then it shifted without pause into trade standard, the common language of colony worlds, and the accent was precise in the way of someone who had learned it formally and used it deliberately. You are the occupant of this structure. I am, Rory said. My name is Drev. I hold war speaker rank for the Drev line of the Variskai clan assembly. We are engaged in a recovery action for a missing juvenile. Our tracking has brought us to this location. The eyes did not move from his face. You will produce the juvenile, or you will explain its absence. There were a great many ways to handle the next 30 seconds. Rory had thought through a number of them during the night, none of which had satisfied him entirely, and in the end he had decided that the most defensible thing he could do was the simplest. He said, I found the juvenile 3 kilometers north of here, pinned under rockfall from the storm, in an advanced state of cold exposure. I brought it here because leaving it there would have killed it. It has been kept warm and given water. It is inside. Drev looked at him without expression for a long moment. You entered contact with a Variskai juvenile. I moved a rock off its wing and carried it 2 kilometers. Yes. Without authorization. Without clan sanction. Without diplomatic clearance. Without those things, Rory said, with the understanding that it was dying and the authorization process would have taken longer than it had. Something moved across Drev's face. It was not agreement. It was the look of a being encountering an argument it found irritating specifically because it did not have a clean rebuttal. You will produce the juvenile, Drev said. Rory opened the door. He had not told the hatchling what to do. He would not have known how. But the hatchling, who had been watching the window and clearly hearing the conversation through the wall, chose its own moment. It walked through the open door, into the snow and the cold air, with a steadiness that Rory found, for a creature that had been hypothermic 12 hours ago, quietly impressive. The effect on the Variskai war party was immediate. Multiple warriors moved forward. Drev stopped them with a single raised hand. The hatchling walked out into the open ground between Rory and the clan, and then it stopped. It looked at the clan. Then it turned its head and looked back at Rory. Then it sat down, deliberately, in the snow, halfway between them, facing the clan. In the silence that followed, Drev's composure did something complicated. The flat calculation in his eyes shifted, still controlled, still giving nothing away to an outsider. But Rory watched the war speaker's posture change by a fraction that probably meant nothing in human terms and clearly meant something significant in Variskai once. It's sad, one of the warriors said quietly, in Variskai, apparently forgetting that trade standard was in use. Drev said nothing for a long moment. Rory said, carefully, is sitting significant? Drev looked at him the way a person looks at someone who has just asked whether fire is warm. A juvenile in crisis separation, Drev said, measuring every word, who has undergone bond sleep in the proximity of another being. If that juvenile then chooses, on its own will, to sit between the bonded being and its clan rather than return to the clan, It is making a statement recognized under Variskai law. A pause. The statement is not reversible. What statement is that? That it was not taken. That it chose to stay. The wind moved across the snow. Several of the warriors behind Drev were very still in the way of people working hard not to react visibly. Rory looked at the hatchling sitting in the snow between them, gold eyes forward, wings folded, entirely composed. He said, "What does that mean for me legally?" Drev closed his eyes for one slow breath. When he opened them, there was something in his expression that Rory could only describe, inadequately, as a senior professional who has just discovered the universe has handed them a problem they would have preferred not to have. "It means," Drev said, "that under Variskai clan law, you are now a ward holder. And the juvenile you are holding ward for is Sale, heir to the Drev line." Behind him, 30 Variskai warriors absorbed this information in near-perfect silence. Rory absorbed it too. Then he said, "Do any of you want to come inside? It is warm. I have water on." The silence that followed was a different kind. Drev stared at him with the expression of a being fundamentally rethinking several assumptions about a species. "You," Drev said finally, "are a very strange creature." "Probably," Rory said. "The offer stands." The clan observation post went up 3 days after the standoff. It was not subtle. A Variskai structure never was. Built from materials carried down from their ships in a single disciplined afternoon of assembly. It sat on the high ground 200 meters north of Rory's outpost, solid and dark against the snow. And from its upper platform, a rotating watch of 2 warriors maintained a clear sight line to his door at all hours. Rory noted it, accepted it, and went back to work. There was still a survey contract to fulfill. The mining company had not adjusted his deadlines to account for the fact that he had accidentally acquired a legally recognized responsibility for a dragon hatchling and a clan of 30-odd armed watchers living up the hill. He packed his scanner every morning, checked the weather, and walked the ridge shelf with his notes and his equipment the same as before. Sel came with him. This was not a plan Rory had made. It was simply what happened. He opened the door on the second morning, and the hatchling walked out beside him with the expression of someone who had decided this was how things were going to be and saw no need to discuss it. After 2 attempts at leaving Sale inside, which resulted in a level of noise from the outpost that the clan watchers later described in their reports as alarming, Rory accepted the situation and started packing a second water canteen. The clan observer reports, which Rory did not know about until much later, began to change in tone around this time. The first report read, in formal Variskai notation, subject continues routine labor function. Juvenile accompanies. No threat activity observed. Interaction minimal. The fourth report read, the human speaks to the juvenile continuously during labor function. The speech appears instructional rather than commanding. Topics observed include geological stratification, the function of scanning equipment, an extended explanation of why certain rock formations suggest historical water movement. The juvenile attends with apparent focus. The ninth report read, with what might have been the Variskai equivalent of confusion worked into the phrasing. The human sat down beside the juvenile on an exposed rock shelf for approximately 30 minutes today. No tool use. No communication with base. He appeared to be showing the juvenile how to identify different mineral colors in the rock face using reflected light. The juvenile attempted to replicate the gesture with its claw. The human expressed what appeared to be approval. We are uncertain how to categorize this activity. It does not match any settler-juvenile interaction protocols in our database. What the reports could not fully capture was the texture of those weeks, the slow, ordinary quality of them, which was itself the strange thing. Rory did not treat Sale as a sacred being in his care, though that was the legal fact of it. He did not treat Sale as an animal he had rescued, though that had been the practical beginning. He treated Sale the way he had been treated by his grandmother when he was young, and following her around her workshop asking questions she could have ignored, like a small curious person who deserved to have things explained rather than managed. He named rocks. He explained the difference between igneous and sedimentary and metamorphic by picking up 3 different samples and putting them in Sale's hand, one at a time, describing each. Sale held them. Sale looked at them. Sale began, within the week, to pick up rocks unprompted and hold them out, waiting for a name. Rory gave the names. Every time. It was Drev who finally came down from the observation post on a gray afternoon in the fourth week. He came alone, which Rory took as significant, and he stood at the outpost door with the stiff formality of someone who had decided to do something they found mildly unpleasant and was going to do it correctly anyway. "I have a question," Drev said. Drev came in with the careful movement of a very large being in a very small room, folding himself into the space with the efficiency of long practice. He did not sit. Rory did not push it. "What happened to Sail?" Drev said. "Before you found it. Do you want to know?" Rory looked up from the kettle. "Yes." A clan survey team was mapping the eastern ridge border. Sail was brought. Clan heirs travel with senior expeditions from their second cycle for education. Something shifted in Drev's voice. Not softness, exactly, but weight. The primary ridge shelf collapsed during a geothermal shift. The rockfall buried the escort team. Sail survived in a snow pocket, but the secondary storm prevented us locating the site for 4 days. When we reached the coordinates, the snow had covered everything. We searched for 2 more days. A pause. We listed Sail as a loss in storm. Rory was quiet for a moment. "How long ago?" he said. 11 days before you found the juvenile." 11 days. The hatchling had survived 11 days in a snow pocket on a mountain in the Varis for winter. Alone, without food or warmth or anyone. Rory put the water down and looked across the room at Sail, who was asleep by the vent, curled in the tight hold of deep sleep, making the particular low sound that Rory had come to recognize as contentment. "You thought it was dead," Rory said. "Yes. I am sorry for that." Drev looked at him. It was a long look. The kind of look Rory had learned to let sit rather than fill with words. "You carry no weapons," Drev said. "You have no clan, no armor, no special training for survival on this world beyond the standard settler orientation, according to the colonial records we accessed." He paused. "You walked alone into the post-storm. You found the juvenile by chance, and you carried it to warmth without knowing what it was going to cost you." "It wasn't going to cost me anything I could not afford," Rory said. "You did not know that when you did it." "No," Rory said. "I didn't." Drev was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved across the snow in the long, slow sweeps that meant another system was building on the ridge. "Our observers," Drev said carefully, "do not know how to record what you are doing with the juvenile each day. They have filed 9 reports. I have read each one. They keep using the phrase unable to classify." A pause. "It is not a phrase that appears in our observer records with frequency." "What are they trying to classify?" Rory asked. "The way you talk to it," Drev said. "You talk to Sail the way a senior clan member speaks to a junior during formal education. But there is no formal structure. There is no rank acknowledgement. You simply explain things. Continuously. As though the juvenile's understanding is the point." "It is the point," Rory said, slightly confused. "What else would be?" Drev looked at him again. That long, assessing look. "Among Variskai," Drev said, "a juvenile of Sail's rank is taught through demonstration and formal repetition. Understanding is assumed to come with age. The junior watches the senior. The junior does not ask questions until the senior invites them." "Sail asks questions," Rory said. "Every day." "I know," Drev said. "My observers note it every time. And I answer them," Rory said. "I know," Drev said. "That is the part they do not know how to classify." He left shortly after. He did not explain further. But the next morning, Rory noticed that one of the 2 observation watchers on the platform above had been replaced with 4, and the direction of their attention had shifted. They were not watching for danger anymore. They were watching the way Sail picked up a rock and held it out and waited, with patient gold eyes, for a name. And the way Rory Callum, geosurveyor, stopped what he was doing every single time and gave it one. The summons arrived on an ordinary evening. Rory was writing up his survey log at the workstation, the day's scans feeding into the geological model on his secondary screen, when the formal message came through on the colony diplomatic channel, the one that was not used for routine contact, and left a small red indicator on the comm panel when it received something. He had seen that indicator light up exactly once before, when the colony issued the original Variskai resource sharing treaty update 3 years ago. He read the message twice. It was addressed to him by his full registered name, his colony identification number, and a Variskai title he had not known he had been assigned. Ward father of the Drev line, provisional. The message informed him, in the measured formal language of Variskai legal correspondence, that the clan elder council had convened a bonding status hearing, a formal session to examine the circumstances, legality, and continuation of his ward hold over the juvenile sale of the Drev line. His attendance was required. Sale's attendance was required. The hearing was in 8 days. Location: the Variskai clan seat, inside the mountain called Vale Soren in trade standard maps, 40 kilometers east. Rory leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Sale, who had been doing something with a collection of interesting rocks in the corner, picked up on the change in atmosphere the way the young always pick up on the feelings of people they have decided to trust. It padded across the floor and put its head on the edge of the workstation desk and looked at him with those gold eyes. Rory showed it the message on the screen. Sale could not read trade standard yet, but it looked at the screen seriously, in the way it had learned to look at things Rory considered worth looking at, and then it looked back at him. "We have a hearing," Rory said. "You know what that is?" Sale made a sound, a low two-note sound that Rory had learned meant something between acknowledgement and yes. It knew. Variskai children were raised with clan law the way human children were raised with language, absorbed before they could fully articulate it. "Are you worried?" Rory asked. Sale looked at him for a moment. Then it made a different sound, the one Rory had taken, over the weeks, to mean something closer to no, because you are here. He had never told anyone that he had identified that specific sound. It seemed too large a thing to say out loud. The clan seat of the Drev line was inside the mountain, which was exactly what it sounded like. The Variskai had been living inside Varis Ivy's mountains for a very long time, and they had done what any civilization does with enough time and enough space. They had made it something that was not merely a shelter, but a place that declared who they were. Rory walked through it and looked at everything and kept his face calm, which took some effort. The main hall had been carved over generations into columns that rose 40 meters to a vaulted ceiling lit from within by channels of geothermal light. Not fire, not electricity, but the slow phosphorescent warmth of mineral-fed rock, which gave everything the amber glow of early evening regardless of the time outside. The walls carried history in carved form: battles, clan lineages, migrations, agreements. He recognized the shape of Varis 4 in one panel, rendered in the Variskai visual language, surrounded by stars named in a notation system he could not read. The elders were 7 in number. They sat on a curved raised platform at the far end of the hall, each one larger and more heavily marked with clan insignia than the last. The eldest, a Variskai whose scales had gone pale with age at the edges, sat in the center position. Her name, Rory had been told, was a Rev. She had held the senior elder seat for longer than the human colony had existed on this world. Drev stood to the side, in his formal capacity as war speaker, which in a legal hearing meant something closer to moderator than adversary. He had explained this to Rory the evening before with the careful patience of someone who was genuinely trying to prepare a person and also genuinely wished the situation was not necessary. The hearing lasted 3 hours. It was unlike anything in Rory's experience, though he had been through mining company arbitrations and colonial dispute sessions, which were both forms of formal examination. This was more like being read carefully, the way a person reads a document they are trying to decide whether to trust. The elders asked about the day of the finding. They asked about the bond sleep. They asked about the weeks since, cross-referencing his answers against the observer reports, which had been formally entered into the record and which Rory now heard read aloud in their entirety for the first time. They asked about his clan. He explained that humans had families and communities, but not clans in the Variskai sense. The elder on the left end of the panel asked what he had instead of a clan when things were difficult. He said, judgment, mostly, and people who trusted him. She wrote something down. Then the eldest elder, a Rev, looked directly at him and asked the question he had been turning over in his mind since the summons arrived. If you had known, she said, in trade standard that was slower and more deliberate than Drev's, the legal weight you were accepting, the ward hold, the clan obligations, the hearing, all that would follow, would you have left the juvenile in the snow? The hall was quiet enough that Rory could hear his own breathing. He thought about it. He did not perform thinking about it. He actually sat with the question the way it deserved, turned it over, looked at it from the angles. Then he said, no, because knowing the weight of it doesn't change what it was. It was a child in the snow. The weight of helping it is not the kind of weight that should go on a scale. The hall was quiet for a long time after that. Arev looked at him. Then she looked at Sale, who was sitting beside Rory's chair with the stillness of a creature that understood this moment mattered. Sale, Arev said, shifting to Veriskai. Speak. Sale was young. Its formal Veriskai was not yet elegant. The structures came slowly, some words reaching for the right form and finding it only approximately. But it spoke clearly and without hurry, and what it said was this: that when it had woken in the strange place, it had been afraid. That it had shown its fear in the way a Veriskai shows fear, with sound, with display, with the full attempt at threat that its small body could produce. And that the human had sat on the floor and looked at the wall and waited. Not because he could not leave. Not because he was trapped. Because he was choosing to make himself less frightening. For a small creature that was scared, without being asked to. The hall was silent for a long time. One of the elders on the right turned her head away for a moment. The movement was small. Rory noticed it anyway. The deliberation took 40 minutes, conducted in a side chamber. Rory sat with Sale in the hall, and they waited together, which felt fitting. When the elders returned, Arev stood and delivered the verdict in both Veriskai and Trade Standard, which Rory took as a gesture of respect worth noting. The bond was upheld. The ward hold was elevated from provisional to formal. Rory was assigned a clan name, Rail Ward, in the Veriskai syllable system, and formally recognized as Ward Father of the Drev line. The legal documentation was 12 pages and would be transmitted to the colony records and 7 other clan seats. Drev, standing to the side in his formal capacity, had an expression that was working very hard to be neutral. Rory thanked the council. He said it simply and directly and without excessive words, because that had worked so far. On the transport back to the outpost, with the mountain falling away behind them and the white expanse of the Varis for plateau opening below, Sail arranged itself across Rory's lap in the way it had taken to doing in enclosed spaces, too large for it now, technically, but not yet large enough for either of them to call attention to the fact. Its weight was warm and steady. Rory looked at the 12 pages of legal documentation on his handheld. He read the first page. Then he placed the handheld face down on the seat beside him. He looked out at the mountains. He had not planned any of this, not a single step of it. But there was something about the weight of the creature asleep across him, the quiet rhythm of its breathing, the way the gold of its scales caught the thin winter light coming through the transport window, something that did not feel like a mistake. Even the 12 pages, even Drev's barely contained expression, even the 7 clan seats he was now technically accountable to. None of it felt like a mistake. The second winter on Varis 4 was colder than the first, which Rory had been told was not unusual. The planet ran in long, irregular cycles, and the geothermal systems that kept the mountain interiors warm were the reason the Veriskai had made their homes there across the centuries, which made a particular kind of sense now that he understood the place better. He understood a great deal more than he had a year ago. He had not intended to become someone with a working knowledge of Veriskai clan law, juvenile development schedules, territorial boundary customs, and the 17 distinct sounds a growing dragon made during sleep and what each one meant. But knowledge accumulates when you live alongside something, whether you are cataloging it or not. His outpost had been modified. He had not asked for this. He had returned from a 3-day survey run 6 months ago to find a new secondary chamber attached to the eastern wall. Veriskai construction, seamless at the join, built with materials he did not recognize, fitted with a thermal system that ran independent of his own and maintained a temperature range appropriate for a juvenile of Sale's growth stage. Attached to the outer wall was a small carved plaque in Veriskai script. He had asked Drev what it said. Drev had looked at the plaque, looked at Rory, and said, "Ward home of the Drev line. Protected ground." Then he had walked away before Rory could respond. Sale was no longer hatchling-sized. Growth in Veriskai juveniles was not linear. It came in concentrated phases, and the phase that had begun 6 months ago had added nearly half a meter to Sale's height and substantially more to its wingspan, which made the survey walks considerably more visible from a distance. Rory had ordered a new equipment harness from the colony supply catalog, reinforced, Sale-specific, designed after 3 conversations with the maker and 2 prototype iterations, and Sale wore it without complaint, and carried the secondary scanner with a care that the equipment manual had not specified, but which had become standard practice between the two of them. They still walked the ridge every day the weather allowed. The rocks still got named. The explanations still happened. The questions still came, more complex now, and in trade standard that had grown from approximate to precise over the months. Sales speech patterns carrying Rory's vocabulary and cadence in ways that the clan observers had noted in at least 14 separate reports, and that Drev had never mentioned directly. The observer reports had become a different kind of document entirely. Rory had been permitted access to the archive at the 6th month mark, as part of the formal ward relationship transparency requirements, and he had sat and read them all in an evening. They had started as security logs. They had become, by slow degrees, something closer to field notes on a phenomenon the observers could not stop watching. The phrases unable to classify and no equivalent cultural framework appeared regularly up to about the 4th month. After that, the phrasing shifted to something he found harder to name, more careful, more interested, as though the observers had given up trying to fit what they saw into existing categories and were simply trying to record it accurately. The entry that stayed with him was from the 7th week. The human paused work today to remove a stone fragment that was caught in the juvenile's left forescale ridge. The process took approximately 4 minutes. The human used a small tool from his survey kit and worked carefully, speaking to the juvenile throughout in a low, continuous tone. The juvenile remained entirely still during the process. No distress vocalization. We have observed similar procedures among senior clan members and juvenile pairs during grooming rituals. This is the first recorded instance of the behavior occurring across species. He read that one twice. Then he closed the archive and went back to work. It was Drev who came to him, on an evening in the late 2nd winter, with the thing that had clearly been sitting in him for some time. He arrived without the formal stiffness that had defined the early months. He still did not sit. Drev had never once sat in the outpost, but he stood differently now. Less like a war speaker on duty and more like a person who had something on his mind that he had not found the right words for yet. Rory put water on. He did not comment on the fact that Drev had started arriving at the outpost at roughly the same hour every few weeks, which was often enough to constitute a pattern, but not so often that either of them had called it regular. Some arrangements were better maintained without naming them. There is a resource dispute, Drev said, between this clan line and the Vel clan line to the south. The Eastern Water Ridge access rights. I know the Eastern Ridge, Rory said. I have survey data going back 2 years. Drev looked at him. The Vel line is claiming the primary access corridor belongs to their historical boundary. Our records say otherwise. The Colonial Arbitration Office will be involved because both boundaries touch settler extraction zones. And you want to know what the survey geology says about historical water flow? Rory said. I want to know, Drev said carefully, what the data says. Yes. He did not say please. But the phrasing had shifted from demand to request at some point in the past few months, and neither of them had announced when that had happened. Rory pulled up the geological model. He showed Drev the historical water movement data, the evidence in the rock layers, the pressure marks, the channel formations that told a story of where water had run before human settlement had arrived to complicate the land. Drev listened without interrupting, which was new. He asked 2 precise technical questions. Rory answered them. That is clear, Drev said. The primary channel has run the same course for a very long time. Long enough to count as historical? Rory asked. Long enough, Drev said. Then, after a pause, the Colonial Arbitration Office will want the survey data formatted to their submission standard. I can do that, Rory said. I can have it ready in 3 days. Drev looked at him for a moment. You ask nothing in return, Drev said. You built me a room, Rory said. And you tell me things about Sail that help me understand what it needs. Call it even. Something moved across Drev's face. The expression he made when he had encountered a statement he found genuinely difficult to argue against, which was, Rory had noticed, more common than the war speaker had probably intended. Sail came in from the secondary chamber, drawn by the sound of voices. It was too large now to fold into the narrow path between the workstation and the wall, and it had learned to navigate the indoor spaces with a careful spatial awareness that was somewhat at odds with the casual confidence it showed outside. It looked at Drev, then at Rory, then settled itself near the door in the way it had when it wanted to be present without being in the middle of something. Drev looked at it for a moment. It is getting tall, he said. Fast, Rory agreed. In the next cycle it will begin formal clan education, Drev said. It will divide its time between the clan seat and the ward home. I know, Rory said. We have talked about it. Drev looked at him again. You talked to a juvenile about its education schedule. It asked, Rory said. So I explained. Drev exhaled. It was the exhale of a being who had long since stopped being surprised and had arrived somewhere past surprise at a place that might, eventually, become something else. He left after a time. The water had cooled and he had not drunk it, because he never did. Rory made it out of habit by this point, not expectation. The evenings settled into the outpost the way evenings did at this latitude. Slowly, the gray deepening outside the windows, the peaks going dark one by one as the light pulled away from them. Rory sat at the workstation and opened the survey files he would format for the arbitration submission. Sail moved from the doorway to the space behind his chair. It arranged itself there, head resting on the high back of the seat in the way it had developed recently, too large for the lap, finding other geometries, other ways to be nearby. Its weight against the chair back was warm and real. They sat there as the snow began again outside, coming down in the steady, unhurried way of a storm that had all the time it needed. Sail spoke after a while, in the careful trade standard that had become precise and its own over the months. Rory, why did you take me from the snow? It was not the first time Sail had asked. It was the kind of question the young come back to, not because they forget the answer, but because the answer means something different as they grow. Rory did not look up from the survey file. Because you were cold, he said. Sail was quiet. Its breath was slow and warm against the back of his neck. Then it made the sound, the two-note low sound that meant acknowledgement. Yes, I understand, and settled more fully against the chair, and was still. Outside, the snow kept falling on the mountains of Varis 4, on the peaks and the ridges and the deep carved spaces inside the rock where the geothermal light burned amber and the history of a people was written in stone. It fell on the observation post up the hill, where 2 clan watchers sat in the warm interior and filed a report that would reach 7 clan seats and 2 off-world archives by morning. That report said, at the end, in the notation of a watcher who had been on this posting for 11 months and had run out of ways to be clinical about it. The human and the juvenile are well. No further classification attempted. And the snow kept falling, as it always had, on everything underneath.